So you might want to ask the Secretary if he's had a good time here, Mr. Chairman.
I've had a pretty good time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I appreciate you being here, and we had a chance to discuss some things at the Finance Committee the other day. And I did want to touch on one point that you and I discussed at that hearing, and that has to do with the tax rates going up next year under the President's budget on people over $200,000. And your assertion that that would not have, you didn't think, significant impact on the economy. And I would just point out, I mean, the Joint Committee on Taxation has said that half of flow-through business income would be taxed at those top two rates. And it strikes me, at least, that there is going to be some significant impacts on the economy if you're raising taxes on 50% of the business income, at least the income that is flow-through.
Can I just clarify one thing, Senator, really quickly? And what I tried to say is it's all relative. Relative to what? And if you try to replace the cost of those tax cuts for the top 2% with, say, for example, equivalent cuts in Medicare payments or in infrastructure spending or other types of transfers, then the impact on growth would be worse.
Okay. Well, and I'm just, I mean, your statement about the impact of those tax increases was, I think the quote was very modest. So I understand it's in the context of a bigger discussion about all these budgetary issues, but I think assuming that for a minute, just simply because it only impacts what you characterize, I think, as 3% of the people, it does impact a tremendous amount of the income, business income in this country, if you're going to start taxing half of that at a higher rate. If you
I disagree with that. Again, you have to, I think it's very, I mean, you know this as well as anybody. You need to look at the effective tax rate. Now, it's true that under our proposal it will go up modestly, but it's really remarkably low now relative to almost any other point in history, even for those past the 2% of small businesses you call small businesses who will be affected by it. So I guess what I keep trying to come back to is, you know, these things are about alternatives. So the question is, if you don't want to do that, who do you want to bear the burden of that, of the cost of those cuts? And I think if you put that burden on other people, like below the 2% threshold, then I think that would be less fair. And I don't think it would be better for growth.
Well, it may be 2%, but it is 750,000 small businesses who would be impacted. And if you think about what that means in terms of job creation in this economy, I don't know how you can't conclude that it's not going to impact economic growth in a negative and adverse way.
Relative to what is the alternative? I think we both agree you can't go borrow $1 trillion to afford to extend those for 10 years. We can't do that.
Well,
so then the question is who do you want to bear the burden of that, and what impact would that have on economic growth? And the other alternatives available to us, I think, are, again, you cut infrastructure, you cut transfer payments, the biggest drivers of our deficits. I think you'll have more impact on demand, negative impact on demand, probably in a way that's worse on balance for those companies who are trying to get people to buy their products. So that's the choice we face. And again, one more point. The effective tax rate, even with these proposals, I think looks pretty favorable compared to where it was in the late 90s, which was a very good period for the small business you're seeking to. And again, using your definition, a lot of people you capture in that definition are partners in law firms, in hedge funds, in lobbying firms because of the definition we use in that context. And a huge part of that 2%, half of that 2% of small business employers affected by this are small businesses who, after expenses, earn more than $1 million a year. So these are taxes that affect a small fraction, the people in the best position to absorb it. And if you don't do that, you're probably going to do stuff that's going to be worse for demand for their products. That's the choice we face, I think.
It's a small portion of 750,000 small businesses, all of whom have potential, I think, to create jobs, and who, if faced with higher tax burdens at the federal level because of increasing rates, are probably going to have less capital to invest in their businesses.
But if you cut demand for their products,
well, but I'm not suggesting you cut demand. I think that you could, if you accompanied what, you know, if we did entitlement reform, we made reforms. You know, you're assuming that that's a dollar for dollar cut, and we don't assume that. If you get one of the best things we can do to get out of the mess that we're in is to get the economy expanding and growing again. And your assumptions on economic growth, which are in the 2.5% to 3% range, are much higher than what the CBO and a lot of outside forecasters are assuming is going to happen. But I think that those assumptions about economic growth are at great risk and great jeopardy if they are accompanied by tax increases on the people who are going to create jobs out there.
Well,
But
we disagree on that, but I think you're right to point out that the choice of how you reduce deficits should be significantly about what's a better outcome for growth. And, of course, I understand and appreciate your views on that question.
Okay. Let me just ask you quickly, I don't have a lot of time left, but, you know, the current debt limit ceiling is $16.394 trillion, which at the time that the Budget Control Act was passed was expected to keep the government funded through November of this year. In the President's budget, Table 6.2 of Analytical Perspectives shows the government will be just $60.1 billion below the debt limit ceiling at the end of the fiscal year in 2012, which will be September 30th. So I guess the question is, do you plan to institute extraordinary measures to avoid the debt limit being reached prior to the November elections? And how does the potential payroll tax holiday extension through the end of the year not being paid for affect that calculation?
I think even with the agreement and prospect on the payroll tax, we still did not expect to hit the debt limit until quite late in the year, significantly after the end of the fiscal year, but before the end of the calendar year. And now those estimates will change a long way away, and, you know, those estimates change a lot. And, you know, we do, as you point out, still have, or Congress has given us a set of extraordinary measures we can use to give Congress more time to act. But what we do try and do is update those estimates regularly, transparently, and we'll keep doing that as we have in the past.
My time's expired.